Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is become. Let's take a moment and review some of the definitions or the ways that we use this verb. The first way you might encounter the verb become means to begin to be. Let's also look at the second definition, to grow to be or to turn into. Sometimes as people think of these first two definitions, you might think of a child becoming an adult, right? Beginning to be or growing into that particular status. Other times people will think about the weather. Might say things like it's becoming cloudy, right? It's growing to be growing to have, let's say, the sky filled with clouds, or it's turning into a cloudy day. A third way to use become is connected to clothing. It's generally used as a compliment, so it means clothing looks good on someone. Might hear somebody say something like, "Oh, that shirt becomes you." They're giving you a compliment. They're telling you that shirt looks good on you. A fourth way you might encounter the verb become means to be appropriate or to be suitable to someone. You might hear like kindness becomes her, right? It's kind of appropriate or it's suitable, it fits her. For now, you should know that become is an irregular verb. To make our progressive form of the verb, we need to drop our E before adding ing. And we're doing that because our verb ends in the pattern of vowel consonant E. Our past tense form of the verb is going to require a spelling change. We're going to change the O to an A and form became. The participle form of our verb is going to require a spelling change back to, so A to O, and again, we're going to pronounce it in the same way as our base verb, become. You might notice this irregular pattern is the same as with the verb come. And so sometimes it's helpful to study irregular verbs together when there are similar patterns and kind of learn that pattern all at once. Now let's move on. I have one phrasal verb for us to discuss today, and that's to become of. This generally means to happen to someone or something. Let's look at an example of this. What became of your best friend in high school? Right? With this question, we're asking, what happened to that person? Where do they live? Did they go to school? What kind of work do they do? Right? Tell me more about their life. Many times this gets used after a rather long absence or a long period of not knowing or not connecting with someone. So if I haven't seen someone in a day or two, I generally am not going to use that. If I did use it, it would be more like a joke, maybe suggesting, oh, it's been such a long time, when it really hasn't. Now let's move on and practice our verb of the day in a couple different verb tenses. Today we're going to practice the past progressive and the present perfect. We'll start with the past progressive. We use this verb tense to talk about an action that was ongoing or that was continuing in the past. Some teachers, textbooks, and even other YouTube videos will call this the past continuous. And that's just fine. It means exactly the same thing. The reason I use past progressive is I try and help my students remember 2 P's mean you need 2 parts to your verb. This is a verb tense where you need to pay attention to your subject. If your subject is I, he, she, or it, use the past form of be. That's was, W-A-S. And then use the ing form of the verb. But if your subject is you, we, or they, our past form of be is going to be were, W-E-R-E. And then we use the ing form of the verb. So our 2 parts are the past form of be and the ing form of the verb. Let's take a look at an example sentence. It was becoming increasingly difficult to manage 12-hour work shifts, so he started looking for a new job. This is a very common pattern we see in English. A sentence where we have a past progressive verb, was becoming, and also a simple past tense verb, started. What is being communicated when we use those two verbs together is that there was one action that was continuing or ongoing when another action interrupted it. So, oh, it's hard day after day working these 12-hour shifts, right? And then an action interrupts the action of starting to look for a new job. Now let's talk about negative past progressive sentences. Again, we always start with a subject. We use was or were, whichever form matches that subject, then not, and then that ing form the verb. You might notice that was not will be combined into the contraction wasn't, and were not can be combined into the contraction weren't. Let's take a look at another example. The volunteers weren't becoming frustrated with the project's slow progress, right? So their feelings were not becoming frustration. Right? Now, let's talk about making a yes or no question in the past progressive. To do this, we start with our past form of be, whichever form matches that subject. The subject comes next. Then you use the ing form of the verb. An example of this. Was he becoming forgetful while he was still working? Right? So we're kind of asking, was that state or that condition beginning during maybe the last weeks or months of his job? Now let's move on and talk about the present perfect. We can use the present perfect in a couple different ways. One way is to talk about a completed action that occurred at an unknown point in the past. Another way to use the present perfect is to talk about an action that started in the past and continues into the present. Just like past progressive has two P's, present perfect also has two P's, and we're going to need two parts to make our verb. Again, we need to pay attention to our subject here. If our subject is I, you, we, or they, we'll use have and then the participle form of the verb. But if the subject is he, she, or it, we're going to use has and then the participle form of our verb, which just happens to be the same as our base verb. Let's take a look at an affirmative example. According to the professor, bankruptcy has become an unjust system. Okay. This, if bankruptcy is a new word for you, it's a legal process where someone is not able to pay all of the debts, pay all of the money that is owed to other people or companies, banks, etc. And so a plan is formulated on how some of those debts will be repaid. So here, bankruptcy, that's like an it. That's why you see has become. Now, let's move on and talk about a negative present perfect sentence. To do this, again, we pay attention to our subject. We're going to use have or has, whichever form matches that subject, then not, and then our participle. You might hear the have not combined into the contraction haven't, or has not combined into the contraction hasn't. Let's take a look at another example. Their last two movies haven't become hits. This is saying they haven't turned out to be very successful. Finally, let's look at making a yes or no question in the present perfect. To do this, you start with have or has, whichever form matches the subject. That subject comes next. Then we use the participle form of our verb. Here's another example. Has she become an engineer already? Kind of that idea of turning into, acquiring that knowledge, sometimes passing a test, some certification to hold this particular position. Now, let's take a look at some words that are related to our verb become. And the first word we're going to talk about is just the adjective form of the word becoming, right? We talked about how this can also be a progressive verb, but it can also be an adjective. When we use this word as an adjective, we're generally describing someone's appearance and saying it's quite flattering, right? They look good. So, an example of how you might hear this used, what a becoming outfit, right? You're saying it's beautiful, it's lovely. Another related word you might encounter is the adverb I can tell this is an adverb because I've added the suffix ly, becomingly. This means or describes either something that is done in a flattering way. It could also be describing another adjective. An example of this: the bridesmaids were dressed becomingly for the ceremony. So here, the adverb becomingly is describing the verb dressed, right? And we're describing in what way were they dressed? In a very flattering way. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.